sometimes it could be worse. Sometimes it could be just 10 nanometer. So you are really talking about a chunk of your surface that you're talking about. Okay, so that's a point of there's some word of caution when you get this pattern and get this diffraction information. You have to be worried about what is the transfer length. The better the instrument it is, the larger the pieces that you can sample at one time, like this. Okay. Now I said earlier on we have been talking about qualitative lead diffraction phenomena. You can actually do quantitative measurement, which I don't go into too deeply because a lot of people don't do this quantitative lead study. Most of the people in the field, they just use the lead pattern as a qualitative way to tell them whether they have a 2x2 or 3x3 or C2x2, this sort of pattern, as a way to tell you qualitatively the arrangement of the overlayer on your substrate. But you could, and there are a few groups in the world still doing this quantitative lead structure analysis. Okay, and what is this way of doing it? What they're doing really is to measure the intensity of each of the spots as a function of kinetic energy. So here I'm plotting the 00B. Okay, so here you can imagine my electron beam comes in and will be reflected back, the diffraction spot everywhere coming out, right? I'm looking at measuring the diffraction intensity of the 00B. Okay, the one that comes right back. Somehow I can measure this intensity. And what do? I then change my kinetic energy of this backscatter electron beam, right, in a certain theta angle. And I change the energy. And I saw the intensity of this beam actually changes. It looks like this. Okay? And then I can repeat the same. I can then change the angle, right? I can tilt my sample and then look at the elastic scalar beam as a function of angle. So these correspond to different scalar angle from the forward direction. So you can think of it as this is backward scalar, this beam come back. These are the little angles that I see. So this corresponds to 9 degree, 11 degree, 13 degree, and so forth. And again, I measure, put my detector here, and then I change my kinetic energy of the incoming electron beam. I sample the intensity, right? In other words, I'm just trying to measure quantitatively the intensity of my entire pattern in this scattering space that I have. And then once I got that, I can then use some electron scattering theory and compare. Essentially, I calculate my intensity profile and assuming a certain structure that I have, right? And then compare it with what I measure. And this is what I see. Okay? So don't write this thing down yet. I will talk about this first. So what do I do? I'm looking at so-called IV curve. Okay, so don't forget about that for now. Okay, let's focus on this briefly. So I'm looking at nickel 100. I'm looking at diffraction pattern from the nickel 100, and I have experiment. Okay, so I'm measuring the 00 beam, the primary beam that come back. Okay, and I'm measuring as a function of kinetic energy. Okay. And I measure the current, which is the diffracted beam, as a function of voltage. So this is why I sometimes call IV curve, intensity or current, whichever you want to call it, intensity voltage curve, right? And I see different spots depending on the kinetic energy like this. Then so what I do is that I look at my nickel surface and I say, okay, I need a model, right? I then created a model for my nickel 100 surface. And remember, it's not just the top layer, it includes the self edge, the layer that doesn't have Z periodicity, right? So I created this three-dimensional model. This is a cross-section of my cell edge for the 100 direction, okay? And I know when I say model, what does that mean? It means that I know the position of each of these in real space. I generate a physical model of this, all right? And this is my starting point. So I assume a physical structure for this, and then I send in my, and then I do some fancy thing. I incorporate this model into scaling off using a Yekson scaling theory. Okay. So what am I doing? I'm incorporating. Remember, I talked about this transfer matrix earlier on. This T matrix. It contains all the physics that you want to do, right? The scaling is still a plane wave scaling, but this contains all the potential that you have, that based on the model that you got. So this is the model where you input the model of this physical thing in there, and then you calculate this transfer matrix, and then you can then determine the intensity as a function of energy. Okay? So you use some theory. In other words, you use some theory. You calculate this curve. Okay? So this curve, for example, this curve corresponds to an ideal curve. There's no expansion. This curve corresponds to your surface expanded by 2.5% from the bulk. Okay? And then you can compare each of these curves with respect to the experiment and see if they agree with each other or not. Okay? So then what you can do, how do you compare them? Well, you have, let's say, you have the observed curve, I sub O. This is the curve that I have, which could be one of these curves, right? This is my experiment. This is this curve here. I just draw it in blue like this. And then you have your calculated curve, I sub C, right? Which is one of these curves, either 0% expansion or about 0% expansion. And you look at the residuals, the difference between these curves, okay? And then you try to, and then what do? You then change the parameter here, change your physical model, and repeat, right? And then you regenerate this curve again, and then you get a different residual, and so forth, okay? So basically you get a different error each time. The differences between theory and experiment is represented by the shaded area that you have. And each time you generate you use a slightly different model, physical model for a surface, you will get a different error as you go through. Okay? So now you now have a calculation, and then you have a set of error, the differences from the experiment. You can then plot this and try to minimize and find the set of parameters that I have that give you the least error. Okay, that give you the least error. And this is known as R factor analysis, and this is where this big, long expression is all about. So there are two commonly used R factor, and R factor is really just a residual. R stands for residual, which is the difference between your experiment and the calculations that you have. And your calculation is based on a physical model of your surface that you got. Okay? So let's look at this. You don't really need to memorize this. I just want to show you the physics involved in this. Usually, it's just an integration of the curve, right? You can see it integrate with respect to the energy, so it's integrate along this curve. And really, just some C minus observation, right? So you have a scaling factor. I think we can understand this even without the physics. We have a normalization factor. Normalize this I sub C curve, right, to I naught, which is the observed curve. So you have to scale it, your calculated curve, to your observed curve, because they don't necessarily in the same intensity. So that's the first thing. Then you essentially calculate the difference. Okay, so this is normalized calculated curve minus the difference. So this is the residual. Okay, and then you have some weighting coefficient in front, and different people, Joner and Pantry, use different weighting coefficient. But you are essentially the R factor is here. It's just this is R factor, right? This is, really depends on the difference between the two, the residual. all these terms in front are way to